Hopefully you can hear me. We're going to get started. It's 3:30, almost 3:31, and we do want to stay on schedule if I can find where I put my clicker. Aha. So first of all, thank you to everyone who made the effort to come out today. It's great to see so many of you during such a busy time of the semester. This is the first of 3 public meetings on the future of the UT Libraries Task Force, and we appreciate those who are in the room. We're also live streaming this event, so we know there are people that are tuning in through the live stream, and we are capturing the event, and that will be posted shortly, we hope, both on the Provost website, and there'll also be a link on a website that our committee is running ourselves, which I'll talk about at the end of the meeting. I am Dr. Jennifer Ebler. I'm an associate professor of classics and the chair of this collection subcommittee, so that's why I'm standing up here before you today. And my committee is the organizer of this first event. Each of the committees will organize their own event, and you'll be getting reminders of those dates in the near future. So, for those of you who are new to this conversation, and hopefully not too many of you, I did want to offer a brief overview of how this task force came about, since that might not be readily apparent, and how we're organized, and what we've done since the fall, and what we're doing into the spring. So the task force was convened by Provost Martinez in early fall 2018 with the stated goal of producing a final report by June 2019. The task force chairs are Dr. Michelle Addington, the Dean of the School of Architecture, and Dr. Lorraine Harricombe, the Vice Provost and Director of UT Libraries. Dr. Ann Kenny, the Emeritus Director of the Cornell Libraries, is working with us as a consultant, giving us lots of ideas on how to think about the future of UT Libraries and the various issues that we're encountering. There are 3 faculty-led subcommittees, so that collections, which is what today's meeting is focused on, and then upcoming will be a meeting that is focused on digital studies, and then one on spaces. There's obviously significant overlap between these, and it's our hope that the conversation that we start today will be the first of these 3 open meetings, and it will continue over the semester when the other 2 groups convene their meetings. As well as, I'll talk about in a bit, we have set up some social media sites to also continue the conversation that's specific to collections. You can find a list of the members and affiliations of each of the subcommittee members on the Provost website. So this is a list of the Collections Committee membership if you're curious. If you happen to know any of us, one of the things you can do is email us directly with comments that you have. Many of you have done this already. It's extremely useful. We were asked by the provost specifically to connect to faculty and to try to get a sense of what the faculty community, as well as research staff and students, wanted in their libraries. In the fall, the task force chairs and Provost Martinez hosted a public town hall on the future of the UT Libraries, a recording of which you can find on the Provost Task Force website. There's probably my link will not actually work, but you can find this on the Provost's website. This spring, there will be 4 events, so each of the subcommittees, and I don't think the dates have been decided for the next 2, but I'm sure there will be announcements coming shortly. And then the final town hall, which will again be convened by the provost and the task force chairs, which has been scheduled for the 29th of April at 3:30. So please do mark your calendars for that event and try to make it. Our hope is that this final town hall will provide an opportunity to consolidate the input of the UT community as the subcommittees prepare to write their reports for the task force chairs. And the task force chairs will in turn take the recommendations of the subcommittee reports into account as they prepare a final report and set of recommendations for the provost. So this is the charge of the collections task force, and I took this just directly from the provost's website. I think it says better than I can possibly say what it is that my committee is most focused on when we think about collections and issues around collections. So really what it is what is an academic library, and specifically what is a top R1 library, and what does it need to be able to do? So academic libraries are an absolutely critical resource for the UT Austin community. As a university of the first class, it is necessary to articulate and map a visionary role for the libraries commensurate with its standing as a leader in the state of Texas, the nation, and around the world. And these are the provost's own words. She goes on to say, as we develop a strategic vision for the future, we must be ever cognizant of the faculty, students, scholars, and researchers who depend upon the UT libraries. The task force will structure its work by engaging the campus community. This is what we're doing today and we'll continue to be doing, and soliciting input regarding experiences, needs, and perspectives from a wide range of relevant constituents. And then I highlight what I think is particularly important. Moving forward will require change on all fronts, and there's no doubt about that. We've been experiencing change in libraries for the last 2 decades, whether we realize it or not. Things change constantly. But we cannot lose sight of the people, qualities, and functions that form the enduring core of our university and specifically of our library. So my committee and I very much support the notion that libraries are and will need to continue to evolve in order to remain sustainable in a decade and 2 decades. They will need to develop new practices and strategies, especially ones that challenge the dominant model of scholarly publishing. But we're also acutely aware of the fact that this evolution takes time, a lot of time. And we must do everything we can to ensure that our university libraries have the resources they need in order to be worthy of a university of the first class. We must ensure that UT libraries can support the faculty and research staff who make UT Austin the great university that it is. The topic of university library collections is, as it turns out, an extremely complicated topic to tackle at the present moment. All of us in this room have likely used libraries in some form since we were small children. Yet I suspect that most of us are like me, heavy users of a library, but largely unaware of the complex apparatus that gets those books into a catalog, and if they're physical items, onto a shelf or other place for general access. We've never had to pay attention to these details or to the economics of sustaining and improving a library collection. Most of us, and perhaps all of us, have little sense of the complex economic challenges that are facing university libraries at present, and how these challenges are and will continue to shape research and teaching at our institution. There are many ways that my committee could have approached its charge. But as we dug deep into the literature and current events concerning university library collections, it became clear to us that before we could talk about the fact that many faculty dislike ebooks, or the arguments in support of or against curating distinctive collections, or the value of culling current shelved content while leaving some shelves for browsing, before we could weigh in on those important topics, we had to talk dollars and cents. Specifically, as this graphic shows, we want to bring to your attention the fact that the UT Library's budget has been essentially a big flat line for nearly a decade. This is happening while the cost of cereals continues to rise annually. The result is that the money to pay for the serials packages has to come from other parts of the budget. Some of those gaps can be filled with grants of one-time money. UT Libraries has been extraordinarily creative, frugal, and resourceful with what money it does have. But after nearly a decade, the consequences of a flat budget and significantly less buying power are being felt profoundly by library users. Many faculty, particularly in book disciplines, are now reporting that they regularly have to use ILS to get access to monographs for their research. And I will just say that in the last 24 hours, I've received probably 50 emails from faculty all over campus, STEM faculty, humanities faculty, all over campus. But one of the very common themes, and not just from humanities faculty, had to do with the access to just standard academic books for one's research. And I wanted to read a comment that was actually submitted to the Provost's website just the other day from a faculty member. Says, I've been, until recently, delighted with the UT collections, which are expansive and impressive. However, I've noticed in the last few years a seeming creep of major books not purchased in areas where we do routinely collect. I've been assured that the standard approval plans continue to operate, and yet recent significant monographs from presses such as Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press are simply absent from our collection, even in the dreaded ebook format. Increasingly, I've noticed that the interlibrary loan copies I request are coming from far less storied institutions than ours, and there surely can be no doubt that a major institution needs a strong and well-stocked library. If we're failing to compete with lesser institutions, that means we're falling behind. And if the collections are weakened, there will be minimal opportunity to play catch up later. It's a dangerous situation I hope the task force will address. I'm fully cognizant that budgets are tight and that books are increasingly expensive, but we must keep up with our peers, or we will, without question, lose our footing as a research hub. As well, unless something dramatic happens to lower serials pricing in the next few years, UT will reach the point where, like many other universities already have, they will have to break deals with the so-called big publishers and lose access to whatever serials they opt not to subscribe to individually. This will have a serious impact on STEM faculty in particular. For our open meeting, my committee opted to invite a panel of experts on the topics most relevant to the conversation about university library collections. We identified 4 main topics for our discussion this afternoon. First, how UT negotiates deals for serials, monographs, and other kinds of content, and what sorts of consortia arrangements we have in place to improve faculty access to content at as low a price as possible. Second, the role of open access, an increasingly important topic for scholars in every field to understand. Third, the issue of serials pricing in STEM and beyond. And finally, the experience of being an early career academic in an emerging field at UT Austin, but a field in which UT Austin did not and does not actively collect. So these are our panelists. I've asked, so you'll notice there are 4 names listed and 3 panelists. Unfortunately, our first panelist, Lexi Thompson-Young, had a family emergency. So I'll say a few things. She's a member of the task force committee, the collections committee, so she and I have talked quite a lot. So I'll say a few things that I know kind of that she's thinking about and what she does. But on the whole, and this is one of the reasons that we have set up social media sites, including a website, we'll be asking Lexi to actually post some comments that she would have delivered here on that site and allow people to engage from there, because she actually she's a very important part of the collections picture. But then we have, our first speaker will actually be Lydia Fletcher, the Physical and Mathematical Sciences librarian here, and then Colleen Lyon, who will be talking about open access. She's a scholarly communications librarian, and then Dr. Jonathan Kaplan, an assistant professor in Middle Eastern Studies. who will be talking basically about sort of the experience from a faculty perspective. I've asked each of these invited panelists to respond to a prompt for 5 to 7 minutes. And following their remarks, we'll open up the meeting for questions, comments, vents, whatever you like. You can see there are 2 microphones set up here in the front, so we would appreciate it if you would actually come up and speak in the microphone since we're recording this. If you're speaking from your seat, we won't be able to hear you on the recording. And then I'll conclude the meeting with some brief remarks about how my committee plans to continue this conversation on social media, including information about our website, Twitter account, and so forth. So this is the prompt that I asked each of the speakers to respond to. I'll just say a few brief things in place of Lexi. I cannot speak for Lexi by any stretch. If any of you have an opportunity to sit down with her, it's well worth the time. She knows all sorts of things about how essentially UT negotiates its big and small deals. And in that way, she plays a really crucial role in collections. Essentially what her role is, and again, she'll write some more coherent comments, but what her role is to negotiate on behalf of UT Austin and then in several instances UT system. So in there are places where we negotiate as a system. And Lexi's job is to negotiate on behalf of these entities with big and small publishers and to get essentially the best deals she can for us at the best prices. One of the things when you're dealing with a limited amount of money is you have to make choices, and you have to have a kind of theory that drives content acquisition. And what Lexi would say is that her theory is to go for the best content. And even if that best content means you can't buy mediocre content, her view is you can ILS mediocre content. Of course, part of the question then becomes, well, how do you decide what the best content is? And I think that's an ongoing sort of issue. But to some degree, it's what presses, but they're increasingly, the presses are not necessarily a reliable curator of content. But Lexi's other sort of job is to try to just keep prices, and particularly the inflationary rate on serials, as low as she can. And so one of the things with that flat budget line that we didn't show you was the inflationary rate that sort of rises above it. And the fact that when we're not getting money added to the budget, and yet there's an inflationary rate, that money has to come from somewhere. So it's not just that the costs stay the same year after year. And so one of the things that Lexi does is try to get as much as she can for the money that's available. And then the other thing that she would have talked about is the different consortia arrangements that UT Austin has, and in particular one called TextShare that we pay into, but then gives us access to quite a lot of content that we wouldn't otherwise, if we had to pay individually for all of that content, it would cost somewhere around 4 to 5 times as much. So it's a pretty good deal. And again, that's something that I'll let her expand on in written comments because she really is the expert. And then one of the things that I think all of our panels will talk about, and I alluded to, is just simply the issue of serials and the big deals with publishers. And that is a big part of what Lexi does, but will be touched on, I think, by all of our panelists as well. So please do make sure that you, at the end of this, the website is just sustainutlibraries.com, so it's easy to find. You can sign up, get updates, and make sure that you do check in and see what Lexi has to say, because when it comes to matters of collection, she's really a key person. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lydia and our panelists.
Hi, everyone. So as mentioned, my name is Lydia Fletcher. I'm the STEM liaison librarian with the UT Libraries for a variety of STEM subjects. I'm based in the Physics, Math, and Astronomy Library in Robert Lee Moore Hall, and so I work primarily with a range of departments who don't exactly well fit the model of the general STEM researcher that I'm going to kind of be talking about. So I will be speaking in a bit of generalities, which I know is often dangerous, but trying to give a kind of overview of how typical STEM researchers work. Generally, there's a heavy reliance in the STEM subjects on journal literature, conference proceedings, gray literature, things like that. And by and large, some of these journals are owned and published by what we consider to be the big deal publishers. And so these are things like Wiley, Elsevier, Springer Nature. And so locking these titles into these big deal packages locks us into multiple years of paying a slightly higher rate each year, and with a flat budget, that does impact how well we can work within our means to keep these access to these journals. In some cases, it means that in order to meet our budget, we have to choose to drop subscriptions to certain items and modify our spending so that we can keep things on the level. And sometimes that can be difficult because the big deals also lock us into keeping certain titles even if we consider them to be sort of outside of the scope of our research or maybe not serving our community as well as another title might. So that becomes a very kind of awkward situation to navigate, but we do our best. The liaison librarians are all very well versed in these issues, and we spend a lot of time thinking about them and talking about them and trying to find the best ways that we can to support the communities of our researchers, particularly under Lexi's guidance and with her team of liaisons in the Scholarly Resources Division. This is their area. I'm not in that department, but I work very closely with them. And so we're all kind of engaged in trying to make things work as well as we can. There are also the issues of, I'm sure that everyone is familiar with the idea of the information overload that we're experiencing, where there are just too many journal articles being published for everyone to keep up, even in their very niche fields. This is something that I've heard from many faculty members, that they just don't know how to keep up with everything that's being published. And then too, there's been a proliferation of new titles. So some publishers are coming out with, 2 or 3 or 4 new titles a year, and because they're coming from publishers that have a great reputation and that publish other high impact factor journals, faculty members want them, and sometimes they can be quite expensive, and it's difficult to kind of add things without losing something to make up that gap, or to have to kind of negotiate the way in which we can get access to those things. I will say our ILS department, our Interlibrary Loan Services department, is really fantastic. They do an amazing job of getting things for people. One thing that I often hear is I'll say, oh, well, after a year, such and such article or such and such journal will become open access, but a year's too long to wait. I need it now. I need to be up to speed with what's happening in my field today, this moment. I need to see it. And in those situations, our ILS folks really do a fantastic job of coming through and getting the materials for folks. So again, we work very hard at trying to manage as well as we can with what we have. And STEM researchers also, and this is kind of not so much thinking about it as a threat, but as opportunities and ways in which things are changing. I particularly work with fields that are very forward-thinking in terms of open access. Physics itself has created a model in Scope 3, an open access consortium, to help make articles open access without having to have authors pay article processing fees, which can in some cases be thousands of dollars. And finding ways to work around and push the field towards open access. And that's a discipline that's very kind of united behind that. There have also been a number of editorial groups starting a few years ago with a math journal that decided to quit working with a for-profit publisher and found their own rival journal that was open access. And so this was something that the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics did. They left Springer and started their own. I know it's incredibly niche, the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics. So they left their agreement with Springer Nature and set up their own rival open access journal. And this is something that's been duplicated by other editorial boards, leaving I think there's been 2 that have left Elsevier so far, and some others perhaps that I can't bring to mind immediately. So researchers are very aware of the issues that are facing us as libraries, us as researchers, themselves as researchers, and trying to navigate ways to deal with the situation that we're in. And in the same way that libraries are very proactive about open access, some of our STEM disciplines and researchers are really leading the way in a lot of fields. So with that, I will turn it over to Colleen to tell you what open access is and what the libraries are doing.
Hi, everybody. So my role is Scholarly Communications Librarian, which is a little bit of library jargon. Basically, I work a lot with open access, open educational resources, our online repositories for both publications and data, and copyright questions. And so I'm going to kind of like focus this around open access and the way that kind of publishing has evolved over time. And before I get too far into it, I want to just kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about open access and what it is so that we're all on the same page. Open access is basically the making of material available online for free without restriction. The without restriction part we could probably have a whole other session on, so I'm not even going to kind of touch that. But suffice it to say that there's discussion around that. Some of the benefits of publishing open access are that your work is just available for free online. People don't have to worry about using their VPN or being on campus or logging in through the library website. It's a little bit more seamless for access. For folks who are not at well-resourced institutions, which even though we are struggling sometimes with being able to get everything we want, we are well-resourced compared to some of the smaller colleges, and not to mention public libraries and school libraries. For folks there, like open access is the only way that they can find access to content. And when we start to talk about global north versus global south, it also is a big issue. There have been a lot of different studies, and there is a citation advantage to people who are publishing open access, so you do get a bump in the number of citations that you have. So there's a lot of benefits to publishing open access. The business models for open access are kind of all over the place, but it seems as though the article processing charge, so charging a fee in order to be able to publish an article, seems to be becoming the dominant form of business in open access. But like I said, there's a lot of different options there. I really love open access. I think it's a fantastic way to be able to communicate the results of the research that we're doing here at the university. But open access on its own is not going to solve our budget problems. It's not a magic bullet for that. I think part of the problem that we have is that we, and when I say we, I mean higher education, has a tremendous reliance upon what both of Jen and Lydia have referred to as our big publishers, our big 5 publishers. So that's Elsevier, that's Wiley-Blackwell, Taylor and Francis, Springer Nature, and then for the natural physical sciences, American Chemical Society is in the top 5. For social sciences and humanities, SAGE is in the top 5. So when we look at those top 5 publishers, the amount of consolidation that has occurred over time is incredible. So if you look at 1973, about 10 to 20% of research was published by those top 5, and that depends on kind of subdisciplines. When you look at 2013, it was 42 to 57% of research was published by that top 5. And if you look at the social sciences in particular have been hard hit by this consolidation. If you look at psychology, they went from 17% of their research being published by the Big 5 in 1995 to 71% in 2013 being published by the Big 5. And the reason I'm calling this out is not because these publishers are evil. They're not. In fact, a lot of them do really great work, and they publish really great stuff. But the problem is they're for-profit entities, with the exception of the American Chemical Society, and they don't share our mission. They don't share our values. Their focus is on bringing back a profit, which is, again, not necessarily a bad thing, but when you try to line that up with what we're trying to accomplish through our mission, there's a mismatch there. And so I personally think if we continue to have this reliance on these big commercial publishers, the situation is never going to change. It's going to continue to be a situation where, well, we need another $1 million because the costs have gone up again, and that fixes it for a year or two, but then, oh, the costs keep going up. So now we need more money. I think another thing that is particularly dangerous is that some of these companies are starting to buy up multiple pieces of the scholarly infrastructure. And I'm going to pick on Elsevier here for a second, just because they're easy to pick on. What's that?
You can pick on Sage.
Okay. But so I'm going to talk about Elsevier-owned pieces of the scholarly infrastructure. So they own Scopus Science Direct, so if you're doing your literature review, that's what you could end up using. Obviously the journals, so the publication mode for a lot of folks. They own a tool called Pure, which is like a faculty profile tool. Mendeley, which is a citation management system, and Mendeley Data, which is a way to kind of manage your data. Digital Commons and SSRN, which are both archives. SSRN is a preprint archive for social sciences, and Digital Commons is an institutional repository. So for the stuff that's being published at this institution or at other institutions, it could go into those systems. And then Plumex, which is an altmetrics tool. So it's a way to kind of try to measure the impact. So if you look at a single company owning all pieces of that infrastructure, they could create a lock-in for our researchers. I mean, think about like the ways that you could move across those platforms. It could make it really easy. And then suddenly, like, they think that maybe they should be able to charge us more because it's so easy for our faculty to be able to use all of these different tools. I also think we need to start considering, they're already charging us for the research that we submit to them for free. I think we also need to consider that they might start charging us for access to the data that we are producing. And that is going to, make a problem of being able to afford content even worse. There's parallels there with like Facebook and Google and the amount of information that they know about us. And we're starting to look at that with some of these for-profit commercial companies knowing a whole lot about what it is that we are doing and having the ability to then turn around and charge us for it. So just something to consider. UTL is trying to make a difference in this situation, and one of the things that we're trying to do is support sustainable models of publishing. There are a few different things that we're participating in. We're trying to make sure that we're covering different disciplines. So a few examples: Archive is a preprint repository for physical sciences. The Open Library of the Humanities is a tool for publishing journals in the humanities without a charge to authors and without a charge to readers, and instead it's supported by libraries. Biomed Central is an open access publisher, and we have a membership agreement with them. And then Luminos is an open access publisher for monographs from the University of California Press, and we also are helping to support them. Those are just a few examples. But what we would like to do is kind of start to move the needle a little bit on away from the for-profit companies and towards some of the more sustainable publishers that we can really get behind. They share our mission, right? On a large scale, so what we've been doing is kind of small potatoes, because there's not a lot of money to go around. On a large scale, this is going to require a lot of buy-in from faculty. Like, y'all are going to have to want to be in on this with us because it's going to involve switching a lot of our budget from for-profit companies to more sustainable publishers. And that's a big deal. That's a big conversation. It's part of why we're here. I would also like to encourage everybody to kind of consider your own publishing habits and whether the journals that you're publishing in are ones that share your values. There's a lot of reasons why we value the publishers and the journals that we do, and I'm not saying those aren't valid, but it's a very complicated system, and I hope that we can all start to kind of think about it in a more holistic way, and what does this look like 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the road. I will stop there because I'm going on, and let Jonathan talk about how it looks for a faculty member.
Great. Thank you so much. Certainly, as Colleen and Lydia have done expertly, I think the serial mafia and its continued stranglehold on library budgets are a significant and really ongoing challenge, and it's great to hear about some of the innovative ways that are being pursued to kind of resist them. I want to speak briefly about another challenge to the role of the library in our university, and I think that really is kind of and this is more from the perspective of a junior faculty member and thinking about research and how this shift is affecting us. which is really this kind of epistemic shift from print to digital collections, which I think is an even more fundamental question than the sort of coalescence of the 5 families of serials, mafia, or whatever it is. It is really, I think, commonplace and something which we oftentimes don't reflect upon, that the media production has a profound effect on both the generation and the dissemination of knowledge. One need only look at the transition from scroll to codex, or codex to book, or now book to ebook, to see the shift in knowledge production and access, and how our students really learn. The shift in media, I think, also affects our financial priorities. It costs money to maintain this important digital architecture. When everything can be stored online, physical books and physical stacks and their modes of knowing become seemingly less and less important. Well, I would not want to go back to the days of hunting down print journal articles or spending countless hours at the photocopier. I want to highlight that this shift in knowledge and the attendant need to maintain a robust digital architecture and the relativization of library stack space constitutes a significant challenge to the library in the maintenance of our collections. One way that impacts my work and the work of many of my colleagues in the humanities is in our collections priorities. The UT Library used to collect seemingly everything in my area of research. This is partly due to funding, I would say, that the shift is occurring. Many times I will search for a book published before about 1970, and our library will have a copy, even very rare works that you would not expect to be in our library's collection. At some point thereafter, and I haven't quite figured out exactly when, the university made a reasonable decision, even before the digital revolution, to focus our collection. For this reason, we have significant and important strengths in modern materials and materials related to the Americas. We regularly hire, however, faculty who work across disciplines and whose research, like my own, covers other parts of the world or periods before 1950. Often we hire these faculty to enhance or to start new graduate programs, but under-resource them in terms of our library. Now, I must point out that the library consistently buys whatever I ask our subject area librarians to purchase for my research, for our graduate students, and for our teaching purposes, and that's phenomenal. We even have several important serials on standing order, as well as book series. And this is all good, but I would suggest that there are also significant gaps in our collections of research produced in the last 40 years, particularly in monographs, and we no longer buy everything that is published. Let me pause briefly to illustrate how this impacts research, and I think also faculty time in ways which we should be considerate of as well. When I arrived at the university in 2012, the dean of my college very generously afforded me $3,000 in library funds, with which I could work in a short 1 or 2 year period to purchase relevant books for the library to support my teaching and research. At the time, I thought these funds were significant and would more than cover my needs. As the laughter indicates, I was wrong. I was more wrong than your laughter indicates, by the way, and let me show you why. Shortly after arriving here, I discovered that there were significant gaps in the monumental 40-volume Discoveries in the Judean Desert series, the standard edition of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is central for my research and for my teaching. The library had purchased the first 10 volumes through 1994, but then only sporadically acquired 10 of the remaining 30 volumes published between 1994 and 2006. These are volumes that list for $200 to $300 a pop, so they're not cheap. Upon discovering this significant gap, I ceded my $3,000 to my subject area librarian and suggested that it be used to purchase as many of the remaining 20 volumes as possible. And I believe that he was able to secure only between 12 to 15 of the remaining ones. Secondly, I have also found myself regularly depending upon the libraries of Baylor and Rice in adjoining states, or the many seminaries in the area to sustain my research. As such, I now spend more time placing ILL requests and making sure the library is purchasing essential books than I had ever imagined when I arrived here. So much so that I keep the, quote, suggest a purchase tab bookmarked and use it weekly. I'm actually behind this week. I have 2 sitting I have to deal with. I also spend far too much time scanning books. that I have on loan through our robust interlibrary loan service. And I will allude to the fact that it is phenomenal, our interlibrary loan service. And I remember earlier this week I placed an ILS request at 5:30 in the morning and had it in my inbox by 10. It's quite remarkable. All of this, however, is not particularly sustainable as we seek to build graduate programs that engage in cutting-edge research. For instance, we can't put an ILO book on reserve or send undergraduate students to browse the shelves as they try to find a topic for a research paper. I'm not particularly sure how we can address the challenge of securing additional recurring funds, which are a significant problem, to maintain additional series subscriptions or other acquisitions, which I think are the second problem. I do think it is possible to help faculty identify and address gaps in our collections with one-time rather than recurring funds. And this, I can think, be done in two ways. First, to increase library startup funds for humanities faculty substantially to the range of $20,000 to $25,000, with 5 years during which to spend the money rather than 1 to 2 years. And secondly, create a competitive grants program for which humanities and social science faculty at all ranks could apply in order to address gaps in the library's collection on similar amounts, perhaps as they at associate and full professor ranks. Ultimately, these steps will not fully address the more systematic and structural and perhaps even cultural issues that Lydia and Colleen have highlighted, but it will be an important short-term solution to support faculty and student research, as well as faculty in their teaching through a truly world-class library. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all three of you. Let's give them a round of applause for this. So I hope that gave everybody a lot to think about, and we'll now open the floor to questions, comments, vents, concerns. What we're hoping for here really is to start a conversation and, as we said, get faculty feedback, as well as graduate student and research staff feedback as our committee tries to frame our report for the task force chairs. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tom Palima from Classics, and I just had several questions. I served on the library committee at least twice under Fred Heath, and one of the things I want to ask is, why has the budget flatlined? I just did a quick look at the university budget for 2018-2019. It's $3 billion. And 30% of that is sort of things that go to the academic mission purely, and then of course, and the increase over the former year was 5.6%. So if that 5.6% increase had just been applied to libraries, so why are libraries being viewed by our upper administrators as not something to which we should direct resources? And this is especially acute because of that chart. I remember because when Fred Heath came on in 2003, I remember his concern that we were falling behind our competitors. We were then ranked about 8th nationally among the big libraries, and we were running on fumes then. In other words, we were maintaining our standing, and then you saw that increase from 2007-8 to 2010-11 of 47%, from 8.5 million to something like 12.5 million. 47%, 12% increase a year. And then all of a sudden, and I can understand why it would flatline then because of the subprime collapse, but why hasn't it then resumed going up?
So I think, if I can just interrupt, the sort of first answer to that is we can't answer that question.
Well, I know, but
the second answer, I think, is that we have been asked to create arguments for why it should go up, because it clearly needs to
okay, so
go up.
That's the big general question, but now getting down to specifics. Well, and also the other question I had relating to budget is part of the way in which that was increased is there is a thing called library fees. There used to be a library fee structure And I don't know whether that has disappeared. You know, in other words, students pay not only tuition, but fees, and library fees was part of it. But that's beside the point. I had three general questions. One, your proposal to create, let's say, 25,000, that then becomes a budgetary issue, right? Especially in COLA, where are they going to get the money when, you know, they can hardly run anyhow the normal services. But I wanted to know the two other questions. Let's see, where are they now? Yes, what is the cost of ILL? I mean, I've been told, in fact, that it's a concern that there's been this must cost something.
It does, and I don't know the exact number, and actually somebody on our committee is working with the ILS office to get all of the data, not just like sort of who we're getting stuff from, who we give stuff to, how much it costs. The way they calculate the cost per item is really sort of what the staffing costs. It's the sort of whole thing. I've heard something around $10. I've heard it range from like $7 to $10 an item.
I mean, I think some of these costs, just for the general faculty to have, you know, information about these budgetary
Yeah, no,
they do bear upon what's going on. The other thing, the question about why there are gaps in collections, I again remember from being chair of my department and on library committee and so forth, what would happen is, as an economy measure, we were being asked which journals did we want to cut. And then we would look at what was classified under us, and obscure journals that were really Middle Eastern studied journals that somehow had been filed under classics. Well, the classics department would say, get rid of those. And so we effectively were making decisions that pertain to other departments, and other departments were doing the similar things to us, so it created these weird gaps in monograph. The last thing I wanted, though, to bring up is wanting to know how collections are culled, because this goes back to the fine arts library issue that may have triggered all of this. I mean, my concern is when I step inside PCL, it looks nothing like it looked even a year and a half ago, and I just want to know how are all those books remained to create essentially what looks to me like lounge space, where it used to be tables where people could sit on hardwood chairs at square and spatially economical hardwood tables. There are now these lounge chairs.
So my sense is
and open meeting spaces and the books that were
so
in
yeah, I was going to say this is partly a space issue, and the space committee can address this, but and I'm not an expert on this, but my own understanding is that no books have been removed from PCL. They've been rearranged to make lounge spaces and so forth. But there, certainly one of the things our committee has been asked to make recommendations about is, in essence, a process by which, but again, this would involve faculty. This is why we're talking to everybody. Yeah. But it would be a committee that would involve faculty who would go through space and, go through shelves. And certainly I can look at my field. There are some books that could go to storage.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think everyone could say that about their field. So the question, and again, this is a kind of where spaces and collections overlaps. But it's very likely that part of the evolution of, PCL is not going to look as it does now in another decade either. And some of that will involve books being in other places. The question is, and this is where faculty really need to weigh in, not just here, you can submit comments to the provost website, come to the Spaces Committee and make your comments there, because this is your chance to be heard about these issues. Because I think, the libraries have one view that maybe the faculty don't always share. And so, there's not the short answer is there's not a theory of how to cull the collections, but there is a kind of general sense that that probably needs to happen at some point, because space needs to be reallocated for other purposes, testing centers, things like that.
If I can jump in, actually, historically, most of the times that we've made decisions to move things to storage, and Jen is absolutely correct that we don't remove items from the collections, we just shift them into other storage areas, usually our library storage facility up on the Pickle Research Campus. But librarians do, as we are being educated to go into our careers, we have to get a master's degree in library and information science. And as part of that, we usually will take or study collection management as a course. It's one that I took while I was here at the University of Texas iSchool. And in that, we learned the best practices on how to get data about what, usage our collection is getting and how to assess the research programs or the courses being taught, the graduate programs in our department, so that we can make data-driven decisions about what areas in a collection are maybe no longer as necessary as, other areas that are currently growing. So when I look at things in the physics, math, and astronomy library, I'm particularly aware of, where is our research going? And so when I make those decisions, and luckily with PMA, we haven't really had to do much of that in many years. We work with as much data as we can possibly get. And so, we're not making guesses. We're doing data-driven research and really evidence-based
I remember,
stuff.
and this is not, first I also want to say, and this will be the last things I'm saying, I really wanted to thank you. This was highly informative. It was done quickly. Because, the economy of time. So this was really a wonderful, wonderful outcome of your work, and I hope you, continue this great work going forward. But going back to the fine arts library issue, some of the data collected, as far as use of books, again, I go over to the PCL all the time to look up the specialized journals that I need to use that aren't available in the classics library in the program, research program that I direct, and I never check those books out. I just take them off the shelf, look to see what I want. I now photograph them and I put them back on the shelf, but one of the criteria that I remember being brought up was use of the volume. So there's this invisible stuff that really comes with understanding the human practices of the people using the collections.
And we're talking, I will say, I have Stephanie Mulder on my committee who is very involved in the Fine Arts Library. I don't know what we want to call it.
Yeah.
I'll let you call it that. And so we're very aware that you can't just look at checking out data and how humans use things, and especially humanists use books and journals these days. And one of the issues is, in fact, getting faculty actively involved in that process. So it's not just the librarians making decisions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, and everyone for sharing this information with us. I've been looking at some data that was presented by Lorraine. I'm Al Martinez, Professor of History of Science in the History Department. I've been looking at some data presented by the head of libraries, Lorraine Heracombe, to the Faculty Council last year. As you rightly pointed out, Jennifer, the budget has flatlined. We could say that from 2010 to 2017, span of 7 years, the budget has been roughly $12 million, recurring acquisitions budget. Meanwhile, journal subscriptions have continued to rise, so there's inflation. The money has to come from somewhere, so those prices have been paid to a great extent, and they have been paid partly with staff salaries. In that span of 7 years, UT has lost 53 staff people in libraries. We need those staff people. I do research, I need the books, but I also need the staff people. We don't just make the discoveries ourselves. There are these individuals who are experts on the collection, whether we go to the Library of Congress or go to the Harry Ransom Center. These are the individuals who know what's there. So to have lost more than 7 people per year for 7 or 10 years in a row, it is simply astonishing, staggering, and heartbreaking. Not just because of who they are and the fact that they worked for us, but the fact that, it's hurting us. So the portrait you've outlined of going to Baylor and Rice to look for books and get for help and spending time on interlibrary loans is absurd. I mean, the idea that UT Austin is somehow poor and that we have to tighten our belts when it just came out that we're now the second wealthiest institution in all higher learning in the United States. 10 years ago, we were the 6th largest academic libraries in the US, the 6th largest. And Tom just said that then it became 8. I fear to know what is it now. So one of the missions or objectives that could be, would be, well, if we're number 2 after Harvard, how about we become number 2 after Harvard in terms of books and staff? I think it's essential that our mission should not be about tightening our belts and about making do with what little we have, but about actually comparing budgets and how things, whether it's the yellow brick road or other construction projects where there's always endless money for another crane, but someone somewhere, some anonymous person wrote some ink somewhere that money can't be used for things like books. I do think if we articulate the mission of libraries as being creating magnet content so that researchers come here, so this can become an intellectual center, the same way that you're being dragged to Baylor and Rice. So people come here to use our books rather than getting books from the University of Kansas and Oklahoma. That would be a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Greg Lipscomb. I'm with the Advisory Council to the library. And following that comment, I believe President Fenves has aspired to move UT into, as a top national public university, into the top 10. We're around 915 right now. And, we're around 15 right now. But I think to have a top 10 school, somewhere in there, you've got to have a top 10 library. And they go hand in hand. What I wanted to, I guess, comment on is more of a cultural feature. I was looking at the lights in here and the screen and the projectors and everything. Somebody supplies that. I guess it's buildings and grounds. I don't know who pays them, and I don't know what their budget is, but I view them as a kind of public utility. I mean, it's just, you plug it in and it should work. And I think the attitude on campus is too often that the library is a public utility, that somebody's paying for it, and it ought to be there when you need it, and you just plug it in. But it's much more complex than that. And I think culturally, we need to reposition that point of view on campus, and by appealing to the stakeholders, who are many in this room and elsewhere, to coalesce and get behind moving that into the forefront of what the university needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Debra Beck. I'm a professor in the classics department, and my question is about, it's not exactly a question, it's a concern about ebooks, which are treated, as far as I can tell, are treated by collections as though they're interchangeable with paper books, except for whatever price difference there might be. So first of all, the price difference is not in favor of ebooks all the time. We are blessed to have a very wonderful collection specialist in classics who sent me a couple of ideas this week for books we might want to buy, one of which, I didn't notice the other one, but one of them, the ebook was substantially more expensive than the paper book. I personally hate ebooks. If I'm trying to actually read something, I need a piece of paper. I cannot do it on a screen. And there are studies that show that, in fact, that's how people read. That if you really want to take in a sustained piece of information, you need a piece of paper. It's not going to do it for you to have it on a screen. There doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement of that sort of neurological fact of people's lives in the way that ebooks are talked about in collections. There's another issue, in addition to the fact that I don't think ebooks are a comparable technology, that I'm concerned about specifically as a classicist, and that is long-term access. Given the kinds of things that we're talking about, specifically with exorbitantly priced journals, ebooks are not that different from exorbitantly priced journals. The person who owns that electronic material is not us. We're paying a fee for some provider to give us access to a resource that we don't own. So at any moment, they can just say, oh, sorry, we're Elsevier now, and you have to pay, $1 gazillion to continue to have access for something you already paid for. Sometimes we think we have access to books, and then I send my students there to read it. Oh, surprise, it's not there. And then what about 50 years from now, 75 years from now? I am a terrible paleographer, but if I were actually any good at reading ancient manuscripts, I could just go to a shelf, take the book off from 1200 and understand what it said. I have no confidence whatsoever that we are doing what we should be doing as an R1 library to maintain long-term access to our resources for a time when we can't even begin to imagine what long-term access is even going to look like.
So if I could just add to that a little bit. So this is absolutely a huge concern, and I think both the sort of issue of how people read, and one of the arguments I've made is there's certain kinds of books, like collections of essays, that fine, buy that as an ebook, because for the most part people download one essay. One thing Lexi is working on is making sure that if we do get an ebook, we have full access to the issue of you can only read 20 pages or whatever. That goes away. That said, the issue of long-term access is a very important one. I'll tell a little story that kind of horrified me, which was finding out that when we go into our catalog and you look up a book and it's Cambridge University Press, and you think, great, we have this ebook. No, we don't actually. What we have is access to that ebook. And we have a deal with Cambridge University Press where we buy a certain amount, and I don't know the exact number, but we spend a certain amount of money every year. As long as we spend that amount of money, which is fairly small, we get access to 80 to 90% more content. But if we ever break that deal, or let's say Cambridge decides to escalate that price, suddenly we lose access to everything that we didn't buy. And what we end up buying might be, and not be the classics books, because those aren't the most highly used books in any given year. So I think this issue, and it's a very complicated one, and it's actually an issue with the serials as well, if we break the big deals with the serials, is the problem of we kind of got into this model of buying access, but then it locks us in, and it basically makes us slaves to whoever's setting the prices. And it's complicated as to how, because I don't think the issue of buying ebooks is going to go away. I think it's here to stay to some extent. But one of the things that we need, and I've heard from many faculty about ebooks, and it will certainly be in our report, but we need people telling us exactly what you're saying. So that we can say, this is the faculty view on campus. And it's not just the 5 of us on the committee saying, well, we think ebooks are kind of problematic for the following reasons. But yes, I mean, I think, and in many respects, I think the long-term issue of access is the most problematic one. And it's also, as you say, it's very expensive. Not only do they cost more to buy often, and that's true in my field as well, but there's the long-term issue of storing them. It's not actually cheap to store an ebook. It's not free in the same way that we pay for shelf space. It's also true with electronic resources.
Jen, if I can jump in just to say, yeah, I mean, the ebook landscape has changed dramatically, I'd say, in the last 5 to 10 years, where 5 to 10 years ago we had maybe one aggregating vendor who put a lot of restrictions on how many pages we can download, how many things we can print out at a time, but increasingly we are aware as librarians that there are issues with these ebook vendors, and we know, and we're moving towards trying to do as much as possible buying digital rights management free ebooks, which means that it's a perpetual PDF that you can download, and as long as your hard drive doesn't crash, you can keep it. And so we're very cognizant and think about those issues a lot. And yeah, I mean, it is long-term storage and long-term access to ebooks is something that we work actively to try and mitigate.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Some people have asked about, because the other issue with ebooks is you can't loan them. So with interlibrary loan, what we're doing is trading physical books. Well, what happens with ebooks? Is there some sense of a future in which it's possible to actually sort of let somebody at Baylor access our ebook collection, or?
At the moment, no, and in the future, I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's, who knows how things are going to change in the next 1 to 5 years.
Well, yeah. You had a question?
Hi, my name's Beth Dodd. I'm the curator of the Alexander Architectural Archives, and I just wanted to provide, thank you for this forum. One of the things that I think might be the biggest challenge for our collections and our content is that we're moving very quickly from traditional books and journal publications to content that comes in different formats and new and emerging formats. We almost practically need to have a futurist on staff to help us, have some idea of what are the needs of our students. Every generation that comes on board has different expectations. However, I think my colleagues do an excellent job of trying to do that, especially with the changing and, pretty ambitious new ideas on campus. So we have different formats and different types of collections. We have our analog and our digital, but we also have our data. We have visual materials and archival and our own scholarly output. And if you think about the faculty in this room, think about how they're producing their own scholarship. Do you feel it's safe? Do you feel it's sound? Do you think it's going to be available in the future? These are the areas that I think that our libraries can move into, which is very difficult when we're, our staff, we've lost staff. We have new and different kinds of work that overlay our traditional work. And if we're going to be moving in an innovative way on campus as a research university, I think, and the libraries have done an excellent job. I mean, we've got a new GIS person, we have data management. We try to work in those areas, but we really need to have these areas addressed and recognized that these are deficiencies for the university, not the libraries. This is for the university. Let's see.
I could just interrupt really quickly.
Yeah.
It would be incredibly useful if you would submit this comment to
Yes.
the Provost website.
Yes, I do plan to.
Okay, because
and I encourage all my
exactly
colleagues and faculty to do so.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the kind of specific information that is useful to us.
And there are changes in use, too.
Yeah.
It isn't just traditional use. Academia is changing. And then finally, I have one idea that isn't original to address some of the challenges here is we do a lot of grants. We get a lot of grant funding on campus to do our research. I think that as part of a university mandate, they should include a certain amount of percentage that goes to the University of Texas libraries to at least for whether it's faculty or staffing or innovation, new models. We do that for, maybe some resources that are necessary, but we have to shore up. These grants are usually innovation. And that's where we need to start plugging some funding in to support your UT libraries. Thank you.
If I can, just for a second, to echo what Beth said, there have been some pretty dramatic changes in the types of formats that we try to support across the UT libraries. I work very closely with the Department of Statistics and Data Science, and so I get lots of people who come and say, hey, there's this great proprietary database that costs X thousands of dollars. Can we buy it? So handling requests like that is something that is definitely risen in the last few years, and it's absolutely amazing that we are able to have the Texas Data Repository. I knew I was going to say, I was like, it's going wrong. The Texas Data Repository gives us the ability to archive and make perpetually available data that we are creating on this campus. And, there's limitations to the file sizes and how much we can store, and hopefully, in the future, some pot of money will fall from the sky and we'll make it unlimited and then everybody will be happy. The physics department was just asking me this last week. Is there a limit to how much data? Because I produce X terabytes of data, with every experiment that I run. And it's like, well, sorry, I can't help you there. But let's see what else we can do. These are things that, we are constantly thinking and talking about and finding ways to innovate within the libraries.
Thank you, all of you. I agree that this has been incredibly informative. My name is Stephanie Mulder. I'm a professor in the Department of Art and Art History and the Department of Middle Eastern Studies. I have a joint appointment in both COFA and COLA. So I'm very interested in this conversation, and I am also, of course, a member of the collections subcommittee. I want to just begin by following up on what Dr. Martinez said, just to emphasize that cut in staffing represents a 20% drop in our library staff. So this is very significant. Over the course of a very short span of time, we've lost a pretty staggering number of our extremely valuable library staff upon whom we're all dependent, as we know, and we're incredibly grateful for everything that you do for us. And following up on that, I wonder if the kind of the key driver here of cost are these digital subscriptions from this from these serials mafia, I think you put it, Dr. Kaplan. I think this question really comes down to what kinds of solutions we can come up with respect to getting ourselves out of these contracts, or kind of how we can approach these sort of strangleholds that we're in. So I wanted to ask a question about something that I know we've been exploring a little bit in our collections subcommittee, which is the question of these consortiums that we have with other universities, for example, the TextShare consortium. And I wonder if you could maybe explain a little bit about those, how they work, and maybe familiarize people here with how viable those consortiums are would they ever be able to really entirely replace those big contracts we have, or is that something that will always be kind of sort of a minor way that we kind of fill in things that we don't actually have in our own collections?
Well, thinking about TextShare in particular, TextShare is run out of the Texas State Library and Archives, which is our kind of statewide, I don't know, agency that helps us run libraries and archives across the state. And so they manage the TextShare program, and it's inclusive of academic libraries, public libraries, and some other specialist libraries. And so, I mean, there's vastly many more public libraries than there are academic libraries in the state. And so the program really does its most service to the public libraries, which is great because it makes things available to anybody who can go and get a library card. I mean, there are things that I didn't even know they made available. Like there's a genealogy resource that we can all go online and use that I think is actually part of Ancestry.com's database. So, you know, I didn't think that we had stuff like that at UT Austin, but apparently we do. You know, so it really makes resources like that available, and it does primarily help us to get access to databases. And particularly very expensive databases rather than individual. I mean, sometimes I think we get collections of books, but I'm not 100% sure about all the things that come through that.
What I've heard from Lexi is it's primarily the benefit is databases and data
There are
collections.
many of our databases that when you use them, and I was just looking at one the other day, it was one of our EBSCO databases, they'll say at the bottom, access provided by TextShare. And so those are things that we get from being a part of that collective. And so we pay a share of it. There are also opportunities each year where I think they do some one-time purchases. So it really brings us a great deal of benefit, but I mean, really that benefit is reflected back into public communities where, you know, information is made available very broadly across the state. We also are part of UT System, where each of the UT System campuses, we all work together, and this is something that Lexi's done for many, many years, is negotiate on behalf of us as a system. And so sometimes we're able to negotiate really good deals that really benefit everyone in the state, so that more resource-poor universities are able to partake of some of the benefits that we have here in Austin. Before I came here, worked at University of Texas San Antonio for a while, and they really benefited from, you know, the work that Lexi was doing here in Austin to get materials and resources available to the furthest corners of the state.
If I could just jump in quickly, I mean, I think the main probably, and I think librarians would say this, is the sort of main exit route from the mafia, so to speak, is going to be forms of open access, and it's going to be figuring out how to change our publishing models, but it's also going to involve changing, you know, having people understand how to change evaluation as well. So, I mean, part of what drives people to publish in certain journals, of course, is that they need to get tenure, they need to get promoted, they need to look like they're publishing in the top journals. And so it's, you know, this is part of what's risky right now, but there are, and we'll be posting these on our website, there's a lot of movement in this area. The UC system is currently pushing back against Elsevier, and it looks like they're still at a standstill as far as I know.
Didn't the German government pushback?
Yeah, the whole German government did, and there's something called Plan S that we'll be publishing about or talking about on the website as well. But there's a lot of movement in the open access area, but at the same time, there's also a lot of uncertainty and a lot of pushback. The Chronicle of Higher Education published an article very recently on Plan S, which is a European movement, but is clearly going to impact the US. And it's going to impact the humanities, not just STEM fields. And so, but to me, I think that's probably long-term where we're going to see the movement. The problem is that it's going to take us a while to get there, and we can't break things until we get there. And that's kind of my view when I approach collections, is how do we keep things together while we're still basically held prisoner to the serials pricing as we develop these other kinds of models and, you know, these experiments that I think will play out. But it's just going to take time and money to get there.
I would also say that Plan S and you know, the deals in Germany and the things that the University of California are doing, they're moving towards open access, but it is still primarily open access article processing charge model from these for-profit companies. And so I will echo what you have said about considering how we are evaluating people, because that's where we're going to be able to make some movement. And if y'all are in societies, I would say talk to your societies about trying to resist any purchase by these large institutions, because as soon as you get bought out by a for-profit company, the charge for those subscriptions and article processing charges is going to go up. So try to encourage your societies and the groups that you're a part of to stay independent.
Hi, I'm Jessica Yeager. I'm a trained librarian who's embedded in an engineering department, so slightly different perspective on things. Just a couple real quick things. For our engineering researchers, digital is king, primarily. So in that sense, I have to wonder if we need to pay extremely close attention to fields for the formats. For some fields, ebooks are not going to work as well. For other ones, they're going to be preferred.
Absolutely.
So that may solve some of those issues. One of the bigger things that I was looking at with all this is how do we identify really good content? And also, how do you assess research? And I think that we can probably make some things to kind of analyze things slightly differently, find emerging fields in different ways, and if we can use different methods than we've used before, it changes the entire research structure, hopefully in good ways. So that was just.
My name's Martha Newman. I'm in religious studies and history, and I guess I have kind of three semi-related points. One is thinking about open access, which may be the way of breaking the stranglehold, but at least the model that I understand open access using right now is fine for grants. When you can build into your grant the payment for your research, but doesn't work for fields that don't have grants. So for the humanities, that's a much harder model to think about, and so I don't want us to move toward open access without thinking about the point that the previous speaker made about different disciplines. So the second point is that for those of us that are in book disciplines, and especially in small disciplines, I'm a medieval historian, so kind of like Jonathan, you know, we're not working in really areas where there are lots of people who are going to buy our books. The publishers' runs in our fields have diminished by about 2/3 to 3/4 because libraries can't afford to buy the books because they're buying these bundled journals, which for people who need to publish books for promotion is actually a really serious issue, because fewer and fewer publishers even want to then go into these areas where they are only going to publish, you know, a minuscule run of books. So classics, medieval history, religious studies, there are a whole set of fields that are dealing with this. And the third point, I guess, is that, again, a little bit, playing on Jonathan Kaplan's point, that I think we tend to think of, we have either journals or monographs. But actually we have, and somebody else made this point too, we have many more different kinds of even physical books that we need to purchase. And some of them are research collections. They're again, for classicists, for people in religious studies, for people in medieval history, these are edited manuscripts. They once were in manuscript form, now they're in printed form, but we need them for our research. They're central, they're like having a lab. And we have to sort of think about them as part of we put in hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a lab for somebody. This is our lab, having that access to those kinds of materials we can use for our research. So I think we need to get away from the sort of monograph versus serial and start thinking about a variety of the different kinds of collections. We have collections of essays, monographs, documents, journals, and we use them differently.
And it turns out, as I've learned, we also have collections of snails and algae and
all
sorts of other things
so I'm
as well.
speaking just from my perspective as a text person that wants physical books, but then we have all the other things that the architecture person was talking about.
Yeah,
right?
no, and it's a major issue is that exactly right, that there's not just these kind of two kinds of collections. There's in fact a vast number of collections. Even most departments have collections of artifacts of different sorts, and so we're having to actually think about some of that and how do we support that as well. Thank you so much. This is the last question we'll be able to take.
Hi, I'm Sam Baker from the English department. Now, I have a question about a topic that hasn't really come up today, but I'm curious if you've deliberated about it or if the task force is. And then I can't also resist some meta commentary of my own about the question. It's the questions about development, because you referred to maybe a pot of money will fall out of the sky, but I think that's technically called development in university administration. And so I'm just really curious, what conversations are happening about the possibility of practical development initiatives around helping to fund these issues. And then quickly, the sort of things I have in mind in asking that are, first of all, I've just had the opportunity to talk to a few development people over the past few years, and I've raised with them, hey, and something might be done, in partnership with the libraries. And the development people just don't look really happy, I have to say, when one says that. And to some extent, I blame them for a failure of imagination. But also, I wonder if we couldn't do more to kind of provide them with scripts and ideas about, why donors should get excited about helping make these things come true, especially because development's not a zero-sum game. We always think, the money will be spent on the buildings or on the libraries, but one or the other. But actually, the more things you have to propose, the more people you'll get to donate.
So actually Stephanie and I had a meeting with Dr. Herrickholm, and this topic exactly came up because it's an obvious place that needs to be, we need to develop development. And it hasn't been developed nearly to the extent, and her comment, which I think is a reasonable one, and probably department chairs would feel the same way, is it's a new thing. They haven't had to do fundraising in the past, and now you do. And so, there's the big development project that UT Austin is doing, and the libraries, I think, have some stake in that. But clearly, and this is one of the things we'll be recommending, is some specific ways to target development, and especially for some of our special collections. Those are the kinds of things that you can sell people on. But also, one of the reasons our committee is kind of going to move forward with a more public campaign, so to speak, is to make people aware, not just in this room, not just on this campus, but sort of within the larger academic and beyond community, that libraries matter, and that you can't take them for granted. They aren't, you can't just put, the plug in and expect the electricity to be on. There has to be the work done. And so some of it is money that comes from the university budget that needs to be allocated, I would argue. But some of it is also doing the hard work of figuring out how to target development funds.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So just to give you some scale of this, because for a while ago I worked with my colleagues in my program area on developing a sort of one sheet for development priorities, and we included library funds on that. So we contacted our subject area librarian and said, how much in our area would we need to raise for recurring funds? And it was not significant, right? We're talking $5,000 to $10,000, which compared to asking for a chair on this or a chair on that, these are not significant funds, but if they're programmed into every fundraising ask that's done, those small pots of money have a huge additive effect on the resources that the library has.
And I will say that we have a really fantastic development director within the libraries, and if any of you guys do have pots of money that you'd like to drop on our heads, I can introduce you to her.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Can I just make one
can make
quick
one
thing
quick
about
comment. Yes.
development? 20 years ago, when the University of Texas, Martha Haley Buckner School of Music, when the University of Texas Club was put in the east side of the stadium, a group of faculty negotiated with Robert Dedman, and there was something written into the contract of that club that a percentage of the lease payment they paid to athletics would go to the libraries, and it's been going to the libraries for 20 years now. So it does happen.
That's good
And
to
that's
know.
because we had some creative faculty.
Yeah, I mean, I think, exactly. This is what it comes down to, and, I'll reiterate, it comes down to faculty, it comes down to research staff, it comes down to stakeholders. And so, I know there are people listening, there are people who will be listening to this recording. Those of you that came and listened live, we very much appreciate it. Wonderful comments, I think, hit exactly nails on the head. Including absolutely, the staffing issue is a massive problem as well, and one that we are focused on, although we didn't really raise it here. So I just wanted to conclude with essentially what our next steps are. So as I said, we have a website set up. We'll be adding to this substantially over the next several days, including, there have been a number of articles, as I said, on open access, Plan S, good things and bad things about it that are worth reading. We'll also be doing sort of little too long don't read summaries. But the idea is for people to be able to educate themselves on a series of fairly complicated issues that all of us have had to get up to speed on pretty quickly. We also have a Twitter account set up at SustainUTL. We would love it for people to follow. We'll be posting articles, provocative statements, and so forth that don't get us in trouble with the provost. You can also submit comments on the provost's website, especially if you made comments here. We'll have access to those, but especially if you have suggestions or things we should be thinking about. It's great to actually put them in writing there so that we have access to that. You can also sign up on the website, and it allows you to submit comments through that, and they get emailed directly to Stephanie and I. So that's also an incredibly useful tool. And we encourage you to email or meet with any of the committee members in person and just talk to us about your ideas. We'll be sitting down, probably in April, putting together a report, but essentially right now what we're doing is kind of coming up with, okay, these are the main things that we're going to need to focus on, and getting the data for those things in particular. But the more that we get faculty input, and for us to be successful, in particular in asking for things like recurrent funding, we need the community behind us. That's not going to happen if the community of UT Austin is silent. So it's really key that you're not silent, that you make your voices heard in all kinds of public ways, that we can point to and say, it's not just the 5 of us saying this, this is the campus saying this. And that's why the provost assembled a task force led by faculty on these subcommittees, is she wanted the faculty to decide what they wanted. And I do feel confident that we will get at least some of the things that we want if we have the support of the campus community. So thank you very much for attending, and we hope you'll continue to participate in the conversation.